Okay, welcome everybody. Good morning, good evening, good night. My name is Martina Grom. This is my third session today, together with my colleague, Toni Pohl. This is my second MEC conference. We have been in Austin, Texas for the first one in person. This year, we are really delighted that we are able to present again. And our topics through our 3 sessions are all around development with Microsoft Exchange Online, with Microsoft 365, and also with graph technologies. So what you see, we have very packed sessions and demo-focused sessions, and I hope you like it. Again, my name is Martina Grom. I'm an Azure and Microsoft 365 MVP. I started with cloud services back in 2008 when Office 365 wasn't even named Office 365. And I'm the CEO of At Work, and we are located in Vienna, Austria. And today I want to introduce my colleague, Toni Pohl.
Hi, my name is Toni Pohl. I'm an IT consultant. And as Martina, I have a long background story. Actually, I was a software developer, and I also used technologies like Exchange Web Services in the past. Today, I'm mostly focused on designing solutions for Microsoft 365 based with Azure technology. So we will show you, as Martina mentioned, a lot of code, a lot of stuff, how you can modernize your Exchange Web Services or how you can use a Microsoft Graph to accomplish business tasks.
And I'm pretty sure you heard a lot in the last 2 days around Exchange Web Services, how to automate things, how to secure things, and so on. And the EWS Managed API is an API which is really used a lot with many applications, which we see with our customers. And also we see a lot of use cases which are currently still in process with many customers. Still, it's kind of outdated. So we need to move forward. We are in an evergreen service when we think about Microsoft 365 and Exchange Online.
It's interesting because I didn't believe how many of our customers are still using such services for automating tasks. So we definitely see a lot of use still for Exchange Web Services. And as we know, modern authentication is a big part. It will not work as it worked before with a basic authentication. So we need to move forward.
Also think about EWS. It's a cross-platform API. It sends messages. It supports Exchange Online on-premises versions up to or down to Exchange Server 2007. And also what we see a lot of use cases is that we have bulk tasks which are managing mailboxes or processing things out of mailboxes through AWS applications. Also, think about if we go into a modernization state, we should think about what can we do to make it more modern. We know it's not Exchange only. We have services like Microsoft Teams, we have SharePoint, and so on. So you can also think about modernizing your apps and move forward and use, for instance, Microsoft Graph to access the data, to access mailbox content, and so on, but provide a richer experience. That means the processing could be in Teams or wherever you think it is possible.
And this is what the session is about.
Exactly. So also I want to mention the Exchange Web Services API is now open source. Now it's open source, I think, since 2018. And also think about the end of basic authentication is near. It starts with October. And also think about, and this is the session about that we say, okay, if you still need to use EWS, you need to authenticate by using modern authentication. Or if you want to rebuild the app, which might take some time if you're in a business environment, think about using Microsoft Graph. We also provided kind of a when to use what slide, because I know that many people need kind of decision points. When should we move on? When should we use other apps and so on? So first of all, If you have a legacy app which is using EWS, just modify the code, use OAuth, and you're good to go. Normally it should work.
This is something what we will show in this session as well. If you really need to continue using EWS, there is a way to do that.
Yeah. If you're thinking about building a new app or a new business process, always think about redevelop a new app. It just doesn't need too much in-depth development. It could be a Power app. It could be a Teams app or anything else. Also think about small tasks where you can use Azure Logic apps and the Graph and REST APIs. And also think about little coding efforts. So that will mean we go with Graph PowerShell, we use Azure automation accounts, we use PowerShell scripts, and so on.
Maybe just to underline that a little bit, for example, we had a lot of customers who developed small applications using EWS for getting a price list via email and then taking the attachment with code and doing something with that attachment, storing it in a SharePoint list. So these are simple tasks that can easily be done today with Flow or Azure Logic apps. So that these are typical use cases where it's no longer required to really develop a solution that is hosted on a server that runs somewhere. This is what Azure provides, or Microsoft 365 even provides us today.
So first of all, and this is what we want to highlight, if you go into the process and said, okay, we want to replace our EWS apps and we want to replace basic authentication, we need to find out how. And we had a couple of discussions with our customers where they said, okay, we just don't know which apps are using that.
So one of the methods, of course, is analyzing the code. And actually, I had a sample for that, the Visual Studio project. But then I thought, well, it's no longer working. So actually, it's just identifying by how you authenticate against Exchange. So if it's a .NET code, for example, and you're using the Exchange service here, and this is in most cases how it looks like. So we authenticate with a username and a password. And this is the old method, the basic authentication, which even in our tenants no longer works. So there might be tenants out there where it still works, but usually this already is switched off.
Yeah. And also what I want to mention here is we, in our other session where we said, okay, how can we automate things? Look at that session because we showed here how you can secure your apps if you work with authentication accounts and so on.
If you're using EWS with PowerShell, it's a very similar thing. There usually you created a new object and using these network credentials to authenticate, but basically the username and the password is passed as it is with user and password. So this is how you can easily identify code if you have the code accessible. What you also can do is you can rely on other methods to detect that.
Yeah, so first of all, if you're using Message Center for identifying how many apps you still have in place, Microsoft started to send you monthly reports, which apps are still using basic authentication, and you can really identify the apps through that. So you can see how many Exchange Active Sync reports you have, where is POP still used, and so on. So all authentication requests can be used through that. And with a couple of my customers, I created a simple Excel file. So this is just a basic out progress bar to show them what happens throughout the months if they do not target again towards October 2022. Also, what you see here, different services use different authentication methods. And also we see here, we have a couple of Outlook Mac, AWS places applications still in place with that couple of customers. And this is something which helps the customer to identify how its progress is and where he probably gets problems in the future.
So if you really need to continue your applications with EWS, the benefit, it's simple. There's a method to do that, and you can use modern authentication with existing applications. And if you're not aware of that, I want to show you how this looks like in real world. So first of all, the basic facts are you can use OAuth with EWS, and there's a path for that. And it's only available for Exchange Online as part of Microsoft 365. And for that, you also must have an Azure Active Directory application. That's part of the authentication process. So let me show you how you can do that. And I have an existing solution here, and that's a console application. So that's a full .NET framework application here. And this is using this new technology, or this new authentication, let's put it this way. So let me show you the process here with here. So there's a description for that. And the first part is you need to register your application with Azure Active Directory. You need to add code to get an authentication token and so on. So the idea here is, and I already did it for one application here, or simply let's use an existing one. So here is my Azure Active Directory. Let's go to the app registrations. I create a new one, and I call it my EWS modernization, something like this. I say accounts in my Microsoft 365 tenant can use this application. I don't need a redirect URI here. It's just for this demo here. So I register this application, and I need to create a secret here, and I need to add the permissions. So let's do this here as well. So let's create a new client secret, say that's my new authentication, and the secret is valid for 3 months. For example, I add this, I copy the value, I simply paste that here into my notepad, for example, somewhere on the side, and I need to add the permission. The problem I already mentioned in the session before is that I only can add permissions for not all, but from the most popular resource providers, for example, for Microsoft Graph. We come to that a little bit later. But the thing is, there's no EWS in here. So I can go to Graph and say, I want to access as an application specific things like a mailbox, for example, or user settings or something like this. I want to be able to send an email, and I want to be able to, for example, read all users in my tenant. So these things, but I cannot use it for EWS. For that being able to do, you need to add code to the manifest of this application here. You can see currently I have these 3 permissions here. I can grant access for this application here, but there's no EWS. And if I want to use modern authentication with EWS, I have to go to the manifest here, and I have to add the role for EWS. And this is what I have here in a slide, which is somewhere here. Just want to show you that. So this is more or less the documentation, what you need to do. You can see here is a section that's called required resource access. And we have 2 providers here, and the second one, the 3 with the C inside, this is Microsoft Graph, and this is some permission I added with the wizard by selecting a specific permission for Graph. If you want to access EWS with that application, you need to add this section here, which means this is the resource provider for the EWS managed services. And this is the idea for the role, so that we can fully access EWS services with modern authentication. So this is what I need to add here. We saw that before in the API permissions, we had these 3 permissions set. So I now go here and simply copy that from my presentation here. So actually it's just this part here. And I say we have another resource provider, and I paste that section in here. So I save this manifest here, because everything I do here in the Azure portal, what I define here ends in that manifest, which is a JSON file here and managed in Azure Active Directory. And if I now go back to the API permissions, we should see that we now get another section here. That's the Office 365 Exchange Online. And now with that permission, I get full access as an application to Exchange Web Services, to the old SOAP service. And you can see this is not granted for the tenant here. So of course, I need to do the same thing what I did before. I need to grant the access for this application that it's able to use that web service here. So I do that. And this is the preparation I need to do to get access with EWS and modern authentication. So that's the first step. The second step here is that I need to adapt my code here. So I switch back to my Visual Studio and here. And there's a sample, which is this one, docs.microsoft.com. Let me show you that quickly. We have been on that page before, I think in this browser here. So let's go here. This here describes what I currently did here, depending if your application needs a redirect URI or not. This is the part which I copied and pasted into the app manifest, or actually I used this app only authentication, not as a user. And now you get the code to access that service here. So this is what I did here. So in this window here, and this mini console application is using, first of all, the Exchange Web Services client. Let me show you that. So if you want to use Access EWS, let's go to the NuGet packages of that solution here. And you can see if I go to the installed packages, here's the Microsoft Exchange Web Service included. And the interesting part here is that you see the latest stable version is from 2015, this one here. So that's an old API, that's an old service. Of course, I still can use it, and Microsoft added the modern authentication to it. But again, there's nothing happening in that service. It's just here for legacy applications. Okay, so I've integrated that, and I've integrated Microsoft Identity Client. This, of course, is a new version. This is right from August 2022, and with that package comes the Microsoft Identity Model abstractions. So if I've added these projects, these libraries to my project here, I now have also app config that says, okay, that's my tenant ID, this is my application ID, and this is my client secret, what I added here. So I have prepared that just to show you that quickly. If I go to my browser and to my Azure applications here, my app registrations, the application I prepared is this one, Mac EWS application. And again, if I check here, we see this application doesn't do a lot. It is allowed to log in, and it has full access to Exchange Online. That's it. So that's the first part. So the second part, how does the authentication happen? Well, it reads that data. You can see there's a simply console application with main application. That's a full .NET Framework 4.8 application, and this is the magic. So let's run this here. We need to create a confidential client application builder to give our EWS application a second life here. So let's start this just to see what's happening here. So this is the console application. I have a breakpoint here. So we will see that this client application builder is created with these settings we saw just in the app settings. So let's continue here. So now have that object here in our hand that says, okay, this is the authentication, and this is the client ID, and so on. Then we need to identify which scope, which I want to access. For that, we need to access outlookoffice.com with the default method, and then we can ask for a token. And this is what we get here. So if I go here, we will see that we now have a token in our hand, that access token EY something. And we can now continue and access the Exchange services, our library here, with that endpoint here, and say, this is our authentication, this is our token, and with that token, we do something. So actually, we are done. So you can see it's very easy to modernize your existing applications if really needed. In that case, I do something with the Exchange Web Service. So I say, this is the user. I now say, I want to impersonate as that user here with that username. In that case, that's my demo tenant here. I add a header with that username. And then I simply go to the methods here and say, get mailboxes, give me a list of all the folders with the Exchange Web client. So I simply continue here. And I'll set a breakpoint here, just a 5 through that. And we should see that we now got a list of the mailboxes. In that case, I restricted it to 15 folders here. So this access with the modern authentication works. And what I do here is I simply create some random emails. In that case, also with the EWS client, I say create 2 emails. And there's a loop here that simply says I create emails with a subject, ID, something, workshop, blah, blah, blah. So simply let's run this here. We've created 2 emails and this is it. And I heard a tone here. So if I go to my browser and to my mail account, you see these are the 2 emails that just have been created by this code. So to make it short, there is a way to continue using your existing code here. And it's actually very easy to do by doing these steps, what I showed here in this very short demo here. If you have PowerShell scripts, there's also a method to do that. Actually, it's just the same. You now can access the service by creating a token and authenticating with a token. You see this nice long URL from that GitHub web page that says what to do with EWS managed API PowerShell scripts that use basic authentication. And there's a description what you can do with PowerShell. Actually, it's the same simple process. Of course, the recommendation is use Graph whenever possible. So that's really just a plan B, let's put it this way, to say, if I really need a complex application, I can use modern authentication with it. But let's come to the second part here. Actually, we should use Microsoft Graph. And Microsoft Graph has a lot of benefits compared to the EWS service. So, but the downside is we would need to renew the application itself or whatever it is. Again, for small tasks, you can use automation accounts, you can use logic apps or flows. That's perfect for many, many use cases. So for example, we had a customer who said he had an external system that sends emails to book conference rooms or something like this. And they used such a EWS service to take that email to extract, to parse the data out of it, and then reserve a room for that. And this is something, for example, you can easily do today with a flow. So not every task, not every solution must be a developed solution.
And also nowadays, you would probably do that with bookings and automate through that. But that solution was built a couple of years ago.
Right. And we renewed it with an Azure function using Microsoft Graph. Okay, so benefits of Microsoft Graph. First of all, it's a unified model. I mean, Microsoft Graph is in place, I think, since almost 10 years or so.
Yeah, I looked it up recently. So it's, in my opinion, it's 12 years old, but it could be 10 years as well. So it's around since quite a while now. And also it's not new, but it's very mature now. We know that because we started from the beginning and we saw it grow up, and it's now really one of the brains within Microsoft 365. So you can't do anything without Graph.
Right.
Also think about, there's a tremendous amount of data within Microsoft 365 and Windows and in the enterprise mobility and security space. And you can use this with modern authentication and security. Yeah, go on.
Yes, please.
Okay, so maybe it was an accidental unmute. And also think about starting with Graph technologies, and you can start very easily with some first guidance in Graph as well. Also, the Graph API provides core services like bookings, which is based on Exchange Online, Calendar, Delph, Excel, and so on. The compliance module is in here. Also, a lot of Microsoft Purview reviews, the audit log, and so on can provide it through Graph. We can also use Graph for Planner, SharePoint, Teams, Viva Insights, and so on. Also think about, if you look at security, the Graph provides data around threat protection, identity management, and so on. And also the access scenarios are quite different. So some things are really already there, others are still missing. So for instance, an exchange management endpoint for a graph or the data to manage exchange services. And we are still waiting for that, but other services are already there.
So I just wanted to add that, for example, we are waiting for exchange management for Intune features. So Microsoft Graph has a very long roadmap, I guess, and they're working on adding more and more services, but they're also dependent, as far as we know, on the various product groups. So of course they need to collaborate and need to open their APIs for being able to be used in Microsoft Graph. We will see that with the next demo.
Also, think about how you want to authenticate through modern authentication. So what is the best practice to authenticate here? And Toni will show you a brief demo around that.
Right. So we have multiple methods to authenticate against Microsoft Graph here, and I simply open the docs page here. And these are the so-called token grant flows. So depending how you want to authenticate, you use the different flows. So you can authenticate with an application, for example, and then the flow would be, for example, this. And my demo, which I'm showing a little bit later, for example, will use a device code flow to say, okay, actually, this is you authenticate with a client ID, with an application, but then you say, I need to need the second factor with a device code, and I only can continue if I give the correct device code, and this more or less authenticates me, gives me the token, and so on. So depending on the use case, you select the flow how you want to authenticate, and this is done in the background, and we have a sample for that. But before, let me show you one more thing. I want to show the Graph Explorer, which is now in a very nice version here. So actually, I want to go to AKMSGE, Graph Explorer. And I'm already authenticated with my demo account here. And I can run the query here. So that's the REST endpoint where I can try out your graph calls if you don't use an SDK. We will use that a little bit later. So in that case, for example, we see the me object here, which gives me the data for my user object. So what else I can do, for example, I can say I want to get other data, and I simply say give me with a select OData select query, select, for example, the ID, the user principal name, or something like this, and about me, and let's say user principal name. Something like this, and eventually run this query here. And then you can see I just get this data. The interesting part here is there's a parameter if I'm using the REST endpoint, so I can add what if behind that request here with $what if, and then you see what the graph does in the background. Actually, this one query I sent against Graph is depending on, or is using two queries in the background. One goes against that endpoint, graph windows.net here, for that user. That's the representation of the me object, which seems to be my user ID, EE something, and says, okay, I give you that part from that service. And the second request in the background is against SharePoint that says, okay, I go against that endpoint here and say, here I want to get the property for the about me, and that comes from the SharePoint API. So that's interesting to see how Graph simplifies some things by automatically combining all the data from various sources and giving you this one endpoint that's easy to use. Coming from Exchange here, I could say, give me, for example, all the messages from my user here, and I simply do the same here. I select only just a part of it. I want to access my Exchange mailbox with Graph here, and then I get, for example, all the emails, the last 3 emails with subject and ID here only for that have been sent to my mailbox. And this would be the next link to say, and now please give me the next 3 pages, and so on. Again, I can use the what if parameter here as well to say, what if in that case I should see that request here comes from outlookoffice.com API version 2 uses something messages. So a lot of benefits when using that, and the Graph Explorer is perfect for trying it out from a development perspective. Okay, I have now a second application. Let's say we want to use Graph instead of my other applications here. And there's also a very nice URL where I can start here. So actually I wanted to open that. And that URL is in the other browser. Let's use this one, aks/graph. And if you start with Microsoft Graph, or if you want your developers to start with Graph, there's a developer program here. Actually, it's somewhere here. I think it's with the Explorer. So learn samples. I think it's here or in the developer program. I'm not sure where it moved. Let's go to the samples here. And there are a lot of resources from Microsoft Graph. So you can say, I want to have samples just for C#, for example, and you can create or use these samples which are public available. And I've used one of these samples here, and that's my second Visual Studio project here, which is also a console application. It works with the same concept. It says, okay, I have application settings here. So I have a client ID, I have a client secret, I have a tenant ID. And here I want to have access for user read, mail send. If I look at my Azure Active Directory, let's go back here to my app registrations. So that would be the application that's used here, the graph.net quick start. And I look at the permissions, what this application does. This application provides me access to these resources here. And you can see most of them are delegated. There's only an application permission here for group read write all and user read write all, but the rest is delegated, which means I interactively need to authenticate against that. And this is what this sample does. So here's the data. And we have basically one initialization for that, which is the initialize graph here. And I've added a second one, which says, okay, I want to work as an application without user authentication. So this application gives me some choices. It says, I can show you the display token. I can say, list my inbox, list my users, and so on. And these are methods I added with another authentication method. So let me show you how this application, what it does, how it looks like. So I simply start it here. That's, by the way, a .NET 6 Core application. So, okay, it's currently starting. So this is my console application. And once this reacts again, that's my graph.net tutorial showing me the menu here. And here I'm in the initialize graph for user authentication. Here you can see there's a device code credential flow used. So let's continue here and simply have a look what it does. So first of all, I want to say, give me a list of the users, for example. Here I'm using an application authentication. So let's see, and I get a list of users without any interaction. So what I'm using here is, I'm using the application, I'm using the secret, and I'm using authentication with the flow for an application without any user interaction, and this basically works. If I say, give me, for example, the access token here, and I simply press 1 here, that's using the built-in flow that says, hey, here we are using another flow. And for that flow, we need a device login. So I need to go to this URL here for getting the access token for this method here. So let's go here, go to my browser, open the Microsoft.com device login. And this now asks me for the code here. And the code is provided here by this SDK method here. So let's take this here, paste that code here. And now it says, okay, who are you? I'm that user here. I'm accessing this application, GraphNet Quick Start. We've located currently in Austria. So I say, yes, that's okay. I want to have access to that here. And now I can close the browser and this application will continue. And in that case, give me my user token. And I can now go, if needed, I can go here and go to the Microsoft website, jot.ms, and analyze that token, for example, and see what access I get with that token here. So this would be the decoded token that says, okay, with that application, you get access to specific resources. In that case, mail read, mail send, and so on, what we saw in this application here. And we see also that that token here was issued at a specific time here from a specific resource provider. In that case, this is graph. That's the idea of graph the audience. It was issued by that token service here, and we see it's valid for 1 more hour because it currently somewhere here it was issued at that time. Actually, it's not valid for 1 hour. It's only valid for some minutes or so. Okay, so this is what this application here does. So if I go, for example, to list my inbox, this is also using the device access token, and you can see we get a result here where I see, okay, these are the last messages which I sent with from somewhere to that mailbox. So that's just a sample what you can use here. For example, if I use 5 list groups here, application only, to see what's happening here, I get a list of the Microsoft 365 groups and teams here, or let's say create a random group here. So I simply press 6 here, and if I go to my Visual Studio here, I haven't set a breakpoint, but actually I just need to jump into that here. So list groups, for example. This is how simple it is to use Microsoft Graph with the SDK. So instead of using the REST endpoint, in that case, it makes sense to simply include the libraries for that, the dependencies. Again, I stopped that program here just to show you quickly what we have in here. So let's go to my manage NuGet packages and to my installed NuGet packages. So in that case, for example, of course, I'm using the SDK for Microsoft Graph, and for authentication, I need the Microsoft Identity Client. So you get this sample here out of the box by going to the Azure portal. I have the link also included in the presentation, and you can use this to analyze how you can do things, or for example, how you can create a group with a specific name here. And I think I created one, I'm not sure, but what's the name of that idea?
I think we're going to be quite. This could work. I think I would pick.
Okay, if you have any questions, please simply unmute yourself or please use the chat. So the idea is just to modernize the applications with Microsoft Graph. Of course, you can also use other technologies. We showed a little bit of logic apps and automation accounts, PowerShell scripts before. The idea, if you are a developer, you can use this Graph Quick Start. This is exactly the sample which I showed. I just extended it a little bit to show different device flows, and I will put this in my GitHub repository. This is a link that comes here at the end. So this is what you get more or less out of the box if you want to try it out with Microsoft Graph. You can see it's also very simple, and using the SDK gives you a lot of benefits instead of using the REST endpoint. So actually, this was a very quick flight over EWS and Microsoft Graph. The idea, the summary here is, if really needed, you can upgrade your EWS solutions. That could be PowerShell, that could be also managed code, like with my .NET full framework application, which I showed with the using the OAuth method instead of the plain username and password. If you really have new solutions to develop, then please start with Microsoft Graph. That's the way to go from a Microsoft perspective. And also, I want to point out, use for small tasks. I personally love to use logic apps or automation accounts with PowerShell scripts because it's very, very easy to use. And you can use, for example, an application with a certificate to authenticate as well. Martina, do you have something to add?
No, so that's a wrap. I think we give you some time back. We also posted the links of the demos we showed today in the slide deck, which will be shared with you as well. And also the examples are on Toni's GitHub repository, so you can simply go there and look at the examples and build your own graph apps soon.
Mm-hmm. The samples will be, I will upload them today. So currently you find a README, including more or less the content of this presentation. And the two samples will be uploaded there to this GitHub repository. So please check back later.
Yeah. And also, I think there was one question in the chat because we have some time. So we will briefly answer those.
So Jamie asked, is it true that Microsoft Graph mail resources actually use EWS under the hood? So do application developers need to abide by the EWS throttling limits as well as Microsoft Graph? Microsoft Graph access to Exchange does not use EWS as far as I know in the background, but they're using their own internal APIs. So EWS was a SOAP service based on the APIs the Microsoft Exchange team provided. So it's not using EWS, but you can run into throttling resources or throttling issues with Graph as well. And that's very true. Let me show you one more thing here. So I have a blog post. Let's open this here, where I was writing a little bit about that. So that's our blog at work.at. Simply search for 429 for HTTP 429. So the idea is we did, for example, read a lot of objects from Microsoft 365, like users, groups, etc. And we found out that we have various code blocks, and we are using, for example, queues to say, well, we process a lot of customers, and for every customer, we read the users or the groups for that user, for the tenant. And this takes a lot of time, and there are thousands or 10,000s of objects in Azure Active Directory. And we ran into the throttling issue, and the throttling issue is very simple to see with that graphic here. So you can see I have 20 customers. For every customer, I process the users. Let's say they have 100 users per customer, which are in that case 20 times 50 pages or so, and so on, and the same for groups. And I get a lot of requests, like more than 20,000 requests I send against Graph. What Graph, of course, does, it throttles, which means it gives us back an HTTP 429 and says, well, I only give you this page with 100 users, but then you have to wait for, let's say, 300 milliseconds. And it gives me back the time I need to wait. And if you're using Azure Logic Apps, you don't have to care about that, because Logic App, for example, they automatically can work around that because they do retries automatically. You can configure that. If you're doing it with code, you really have to wait in your code for at least that time the Microsoft Graph request returns you, and then you can start asking for the next page. So that's important from my perspective to really work with Microsoft Graph to say, whatever I do, whatever API for Microsoft I access, there's throttling behind. I have to take care. If I expect a lot of data coming back, I need to check the result if it really worked, or if I get an HTTP 429, which means throttling.
And also, it's a good recommendation, as you mentioned, Logic Apps can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Logic Apps are really very easy to use and have this benefit that they automatically retry. Okay, is any new retirement dates for EWS against Exchange Online? Not that I know. So they stopped working on EWS, but modern authentication, I think they added that something like 3 years ago, and that's the current status. So I don't know if if it will continue to work, or if Microsoft plans to switch it off. I don't think so, because there's still a lot of applications out there, but you need to use modern authentication for that.
And probably that's a good question for the Microsoft product group.
Mohammed also asked, is there a way we can check any logs from Azure O365 if the application is successfully able to make connections with Microsoft Graph to Exchange Online mailbox? If we access an object with Microsoft within Microsoft Graph, I don't know if that shows up in the audit logs, if it's successful or not. Do you know that, Martina?
No, I'm not sure. If it's not in the security graph, all authentication logs should be there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe security logs is a good answer for that, because actually there's a lot of data, a lot of signals coming into Microsoft Graph. I'm not sure if they really log everything, but eventually such events could pop up and you could analyze that with Azure Sentinel.
Yeah. Okay, anything else? Any more questions?
I hope this is useful just to modernize your existing applications and using Microsoft Graph in future. So that's the message we want to provide here. AWS is very simple to use, and it was used a lot, but Microsoft Graph is also simple. And that's the way to go from our perspective.
Okay. So thank you for attending the session, and I hope you liked it. If you have any more questions, the chat is still open and we would try to answer that. Otherwise, simply follow us on Twitter, ask your questions there, and hopefully to see you soon and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.